If you know me, then you would know that Star Wars Battlefront 2 from 2005 is my favorite video game of all time. It innovated in so many ways, and it was my first ever immersive war experience. And it's Star Wars, so I play the absolute shit out of this game. However, we are not talking about this version. Instead, we are talking about the PSP port of the game, developed by Pandemic Studios and Savage Entertainment. I kept on being reminded that this game exists, so I wanted to finally check it out, and I was pleasantly surprised about the game, so let's talk about it. But before we get started, I want to make a disclaimer. I have never owned a PlayStation Portable, so I couldn't tell you how this game runs on real hardware, so if I mention something that isn't the case for the physical version of this game, please let me know in the comments. Also, this is just my opinion, so please don't be upset if I say something you don't like. So with that out of the way, let's get into the review. While 2 out of the 3 game modes from the console game was brought to this version, those being Galactic Conquest and Instant Action, this game does not have a campaign or story mode. Instead, the developers made a challenge mode, which we will talk about first. There are 3 sets of challenges for you to play. All of them have 4 different stages, and the main goal is to achieve a high score. You get points for kills and how fast you get them, and you can lose points for any time you die, and all of the points add up at the end after all 4 stages. The first one we'll look at is the Imperial Enforcer, or ImpEnf for short. These levels will have you playing as stormtroopers, eliminating various different enemy types before a timer runs out. Said enemies being Gungans, Jawas, Ewoks, and Wookiees. These are like hunt mode, but in a campaign-like fashion. Overall, these are okay, but you can unlock Boba Fett to cheese the missions, or if you're like me, do this. But yeah, not too shabby. The next challenge is Rogue Assassin, and you play as a clone trooper hunting down special forces before another time runs out. In some of the missions, more of them will spawn, so there will be more for you to kill. And there's also an army of normal troopers or soldiers alongside your targets. These are my favorite ones because they are the most interesting. Your clone trooper is the original jet trooper model with the jetpack included, and you have a fusion cutter just in case you want to fix this turret up right. Also the fact that you fight in scenarios that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Then the last challenge is Rebel Raider, which is kind of a capture the flag-esque mode where you play as the rebellion and you have to find certain items and bring them to a certain location before, guess what, the timer runs out. Now the concept of these missions is pretty cool, however these are by far the worst. The items you find are large and the enemy AI is designed very poorly. Either they can camp at the area you need to bring the items to, or they'll be dumb as shit and not attack you. Really the only interesting part is that one of the missions is a space battle, which has you flying to the enemy fleet to obtain your items and bring them back to your fleet, but the worst part about it is that if you die while you have the item in space, that item will disappear instead of you being able to obtain it again from where you were killed. Overall, these missions are pretty decent. They can be fun at times, and it's a good game mode if you're into grinding for the highest scores possible. Unfortunately, the only one I can see myself going back to is the Clone Trooper one, and that's all I can really say about the challenges. Now on to Galactic Conquest. This is practically the same as the other versions, just with less planets on the map, which makes sense because there are fewer maps in this version of the game. The bonuses and units are all here, and you move around in turns like you usually would. Just the only difference is that the board you play on is smaller. The only gripe I have with this version is that Hoth and Endor are in the game, but Kamino and Geonosis aren't. They added the 2 crucial planets for the Galactic Civil War, but they took out the ones for the Clone Wars. I guess it's fine since you don't have to worry about permanently losing one of them, but it kinda doesn't make sense, you know what I mean? Then the next game mode is Instant Action, which once again is nearly identical to the other versions, just with less maps. You still have the options of playing Conquest, Capture the Flag, Hunt, Assault, and Heroes vs Villains on the fly. You still have the playlist creation ability as well as game mode options to add more troops or a time limit if you hate yourself. So that's pretty much all the content that this game has to offer. Now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of the video. The main reason I wanted to even try out the game in the first place. How does the game feel to play? And what corners were cut to get this game running on a PlayStation Portable? Like I said earlier in the video, I've only played this game on an emulator, so if anything I say about the game isn't the case on real hardware, let me know in the comments. So in terms of the actual gameplay, it genuinely feels like Battlefront 2. Yeah, the graphics aren't as good, the models can glitch out and are a bit blockier, and the textures are lower resolution. It still looks and feels like the real game, and it runs at 60 frames per second, which is pretty impressive considering the console versions only run at 30 frames per second. The controls are definitely something though. Since the PSP only had one analog stick, the only way to look around was with the face buttons. Anything else that was controlled by the right analog stick in the other versions have been also mapped to the face buttons. An example being speeding up and slowing down in a tank or starfighter. The PSP also doesn't have 2 sets of shoulder buttons like the PS2 controllers do, so you have to cycle through your weapons by pressing right on the D-pad, which I put quite a few hours into the game for this review and I'm still not used to it. Down on the D-pad targets an enemy, left on the D-pad will zoom in, and up will do nothing, at least for infantry controls. The right shoulder button is used for shooting weapons and using your items, which is normal and feels fine, but the left shoulder button is used for jumping, and if you hold it down you will sprint. There are other control options you can use and you're able to map the buttons to whatever you want, but I only use the default controls, which are pretty hit and miss. While I can get used to the controls with enough time, there is one major problem about this version that is actually very disappointing to me, and it's the space battles. The space battles in the normal game are magical, and I don't think any game has or ever will be able to come close to these. However, the space battles in this version of the game had a few crucial elements taken from them. The first being the lack of different ship layouts. There are only the small layouts for both eras. While this isn't the biggest deal in the world, it still kind of feels odd that we are restricted to the smaller space maps, yet we have maps like Hoth and Endor, which are huge. The second thing, however, is that they completely took away the ability to destroy the ship from the inside. You can only go into the hangar areas of the fleets. That's it. That is incredibly disappointing, and I don't understand why that ability was taken out. Without these features, this makes the space battles feel more bland and repetitive, which is a bit of a shame because of how amazing they are in the real game. Other than the couple problems I had with this version of the game, it's actually pretty good. If I had a PSP in this game growing up, I would have been pretty stoked because I could take my favorite game wherever and be quite entertained. I still prefer the other versions, of course, but I'm still happy I finally tried this game out, and I definitely recommend it if you're curious. This video took me a while to make, so I would greatly appreciate a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you want more content like this. Also, go follow my Twitch to watch me suck at games. And with that, I thank you for watching, take care, and be safe.